All right, so tell me a little bit about your journey in the disability community. How did that come about?
Well, at first, I want to say thank you so much for having me on your podcast, and I really appreciate it. And I started very early on, very interested in doing what I could with the privileges I've been given and the skills and the opportunities to work on matters that impact people in terms of inequality. So I was a civil rights lawyer, and I had the good fortune of working at the disability rights section at the Justice Department, and working on ADA cases with such brilliant colleagues that work uh, to enforce the rights of Americans with disabilities. And so that was part of the work that really informed some of the work that I do today.
Mm-hmm. So you're the founder and CEO of SmartJob. What's that about?
Well, SmartJob is an ecosystem builder for entrepreneurship, and it's working on closing the disability wealth gap by um, taking a look at where there are resource constraints that are keeping people back from participating in the innovation economy, how we can support people with brilliant ideas to commercialize those ideas and become entrepreneurs themselves, how we can support people who are co-creating and co-designing with the disability community, to get their product design right, to focus on principles of universal and inclusive design, to generate the next great products that people can leverage to access equity at work, in school, in skills training, and caregiving. So we're working to coordinate more community access points to entrepreneurship, and to do it with great partners around the world through SmartJob.
Mm-hmm. So my next question is like how I don't know if you guys do this at SmartJob, but how does your company help candidates with people with disabilities find and retain jobs, how do you sort of tailor the job to a person's abilities or needs? Because obviously there are millions of people with disabilities and they have, different needs or accommodations that they may need. So,
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons that I named the company SmartJob, that is this ecosystem builder and working on entrepreneurship as a category, was that for far too long, the burden has been on people with disabilities to ask for special dispensation or modification at work. And in order to access upward mobility in the economy, it takes employers making reasonable accommodations or modifications to the work environment. But there's a new era and a new idea around technology that instead of asking for special dispensation, there are people who are great innovators who are leveraging their lived experience of disability to generate tools and opportunity for work to be done differently, and not requiring anything to change about the person, but requiring the means with which we work and the tools that people have access to change. And some of the most brilliant people in the market today who are raising venture capital funds or who are generating high growth startups and working on the issue of disability are making work tools that are going to add great value to the inclusion of workers with disabilities at work, and also have great knock-on effects or great benefits to workers without disabilities in improving productivity. So instead of the burden being on this idea of fitting people in to old attitudes about work, we're seeing new tools generated that are transforming the relationship between workers and the workplace. And those tools ultimately have something in common. which is they have to do with flexibility. And they have to do with improving productivity by increasing the ways that workers can be productive, but in a flexible work environment. Increasing the ways that people can find job opportunities and information about work that is bespoke to their interests, customized to their interests and needs and preferences. And no one has perfected that more than the worker with disability, which is that there's nothing more powerful in the labor force, in terms of labor force participation, than the right person fit with the right job for their particular skills. So we're seeing work tech that is job matching technology, job matching software that's screening workers with disabilities in and matching them with jobs that suit their interests. So that's just one example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's cool. Um, my next question is, what is it that companies often overlook when hiring candidates with people with disabilities?
Well, I think that we've lived in a world where there hasn't always been a glass door at the start of the relationship between employer and employee. Both sides have, there's a certain mythology in the recruitment, hiring, onboarding, and retention process between worker and employer. And some of those mythologies have to do on the employer side with a misunderstanding of how expensive it is to accommodate a worker with a disability. And in fact, we know from research from the Job Accommodation Network and others that have more recently looked at the issue, that the average cost of accommodation is well below $500 or less, sometimes $300 or less, or no cost at all, depending on the particular scenario. So there's been a mythology around how expensive it is to accommodate applicants with disabilities. And then on the employee side, there's been a terrific fear of self-identification because of a long history of discrimination. It seems to be illogical to a job applicant with a disability to want to self-identify because the logic of discrimination would have them screened out. That's all changing as the ADA marches on, and we're 33 years into having that profound civil rights statute that employment discrimination is outlawed on the basis of disability in the United States. But the truth is that both sides of that relationship have carried those fears. And what we are seeing now in the market is tools that are trying to drive more transparency between those two parties. Because what we know to be true is that when a job applicant can be truly honest about who they are, bring their whole person to work, and request that they be regarded as talented, qualified, and in need of certain flexibilities at work. And when an employer brings a sense of optimism about the true value that employees with disabilities are going to drive into their business, whether it be better decision-making processes with more diverse decision makers, or it be more productive workers. But when the employer understands the value of disability talent, that when those two sides meet, that we're going to see major changes in the labor market going forward.
Mm-hmm. My next question is, what can be done to really change that narrative of like getting more people with disabilities, in the workforce? Because you talked a little bit about how technology is really advancing and really modernizing the way we usually look at, the hiring process, the application process. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, so we are seeing the prevalence of work tech tools and upskilling and reskilling tools at work, and the predominance of new commercialized assistive technologies that are reducing the pain point for employers in having a ready access to solutions for their workforce. If we took how we find and obtain employment is changing. There's a lot of complaints about discriminatory AI across the world. But we're seeing companies that are recognizing where there are fault lines and where there is discrimination, and they're planning and baking into their technology the antidote to that discrimination. So we're seeing AI job matching platforms that are screening people with disabilities in rather than out on the basis of their qualification for the job and their disability being a net advantage. We're seeing in the way that employers now have access to a more skilled workforce, we're seeing point solutions for upskilling workers into new career pathways where there is employer growth and growing industries. So we're looking at digital SaaS products that are offering skills training to workers with a range of disabilities in things like cybersecurity, IT security, graphic design. I just talked the other day to an agri-tech business that is training workers in the very bleeding edge of agriculture technology. So we're seeing that there's more options for employers to link with some of these high growth startups that can produce and deliver value in their inbound recruitment efforts for workers. We're also seeing assistive technology change from a solidly medical lane and oftentimes a reimbursement lane, public reimbursement strategies. We're seeing it change into sometimes very affordable, low price point turnkey solutions that are removing barriers for workers, and that workers can buy into access points, and employers can buy into access points to this assistive technology. So the example would be captioning. And captioning that used to be very expensive has come down in price point, become affordable. We're also seeing enterprise employers purchasing captioning for their entire workforce, mostly because it has very high efficacy in giving information to people who are deaf and hard of hearing at work and who are valued employees, but also because captioning is a profound note-taking tool for people who have, whether it be memory loss, traumatic brain injury, whether it be just an organizational tool for people with learning differences. So we're seeing that assistive technology that can solve for one use case really well has so many benefits to so many workers and are becoming altogether accepted as productivity tools.
Mm-hmm. My last question is, what can companies take away from your type of work, as like a company? Because not a lot of companies adopt, your model of like using technology for these kinds of things, like jobs, um, so what can other companies take away from this basically? How can they sort of implement that model that you guys are doing as a company?
Well, I think a lot of these conversations about workforce development and about work in the disability community have often been well-informed and well-intentioned, but often forget to add the component to the conversation that involves technology. And in fact, many states operate workforce development systems, whether it be vocational rehabilitation, Medicaid, HCBS waivers, but people are getting access to services, but not always access to technology. And yet, when we look at the common experience of workers outside the disability workforce system, they're accessing tech and they're competing in a global marketplace with tech. And to get to the same starting line in the global economy, we need to make sure that workers with disabilities have great access to the technology they need to compete and succeed in any number of career pathways and industries. The problem is that with a lack of stewardship, coordination, and particularly investment capital, a lot of these products have been relegated to a lane where they need to be reimbursed, or they have a very, very high price point for the average consumer. When we're seeing people come in who have an entrepreneurial spirit, but also who are leveraging investment capital, we're seeing products be able to scale. We're seeing products become more commercially available. And we're seeing more affordability in terms of the making a meaningful choice to access technology. We're seeing more technologies altogether, and we're seeing them more available to more people. So that's our attitude. We don't think that any employer would think it's not a useful thing to them from an employer perspective that there's more choice in the market to buy tools that will help their workforce. So some of the larger employers in the country are very excited about accessing these technologies and making them available to their employees. And as I said earlier, not just to some of their employees, but many of them are seeing assistive technologies and workplace technologies as being particularly useful for their workforce with disabilities, but also having abundant benefits to all of their workers.
Mm-hmm. Good to know.